more depth about some of the issues that are raised in the BBC Radio 4 series, The Things We Forgot to Remember. Today, I'm discussing some of the ways that our knowledge of the past got transmitted to us in the present. Remembering on a historical scale is a conscious act. Commemoration doesn't just happen, it has to be willed. This often brings us back to stories told that refer to things we have in common, such as the nation and religion. With me to discuss this issue, I have one of my colleagues, Donna Loftus, a fellow historian at the Open University, and another of our colleagues, Paul Lawrence, also an Open University historian. Like all honest academic historians, we admit that only a few thousand people ever read the books we write. So how do people, the public at large, get their knowledge of history? Can I begin by asking you, Paul, can you tell us about some of the ways that popular knowledge about the past has been produced and reproduced?
This is an interesting question, Chris, because very often the memory of the past, of past events, is treated as something extremely unproblematic. It's not questioned or problematised. In actual fact, the more you look to the 19th century and certainly the first half of the 20th century, the more you become aware of the conscious construction, the production of memory. So from, say, 1850 certainly to the Second World War, you have the conscious construction of a number of events of national remembrance, pageants, festivals. It's probably best to illustrate this with a couple of examples. If we look in France, for example, from the 1870s onwards, the Third Republic is looking to consolidate its popularity, looking to consolidate national consciousness. What happens then is that Bastille Day, the traditional 14th of July celebration, which hasn't been celebrated at all up until that point, suddenly in 1880 gets picked as an exciting event of national memory which can unify the nation, starts being promoted as something which the nation should celebrate. Similarly, in England, Empire Day starts to be celebrated in the early part of the 20th century. This is consciously produced. It's not a popular upwelling of sentiment. This is something which Lord Meath of Brabazon and a number of government officials decide would be a great idea to bind the empire together. Let's have a big celebration. So what you find is there's the conscious decision to produce certain versions of the past and celebrate them. But that's not the entire story. This isn't just propaganda. This taps into existing sentiment, which is then reproduced by education. So you have, if you like, both the top-down encouragement to celebrate a particular version of the past and the bottom-up acceptance of that past. Of course, what's quite hard to assess here is the reception of this type of commemoration. It's very easy to say, this is what the celebration was like, this is what it aimed at. It's much harder to assess the extent to which the general public took on board this version of history.
Right, so although we can measure, if you like, the inputs, the outputs are difficult. We know what people were being told. It's hard to find out what they felt about these messages. Donna, if I could bring you in, is it possible to find out, for example, what people thought about these big events? What are the limits of studying popular memory?
Well, Chris, the personal account or the individual story is a great way for historians to access information about how people experience these events in history, not only in terms of the difference they make to their everyday life, but also in terms of what they meant to people in the past. Historians have used oral history and life-writing sources to access these kinds of personal accounts. OK, so life-writing, you mean autobiographies, diaries? Yes, precisely that sort of thing. Yeah.
Right. I mean, does this way of looking at history end up producing a different version to the sort of top-down picture that Paul's presented of, a member of the cabinet decides Empire Day will be a good idea, we celebrate Empire Day? Is the picture from the personal side a different picture?
Well, in many respects it is, because in a sense it enriches the archive. It opens up many different stories to historians, for historians to use. And in many respects, they bring different experiences to bear, different accounts, different versions, different perspectives. And it's not just limited to individual stories. There's also now an increasing awareness of artifacts and things and the way these trigger memories and how these can help us bring together the stories of people and places and objects through time. So yes, Chris, in many respects they do. However, on the other hand, it's surprising how many of these personal accounts, how many of these personal histories do repeat or reproduce the kinds of collective histories that Paul was referring to earlier.
So you'd mean, rather than thinking about what actually happened, someone just reaches for the programme, reaches for the script and says, well, this obviously happened because it's down here.
Well, yes, because I suppose the minute we start to process our memories, the minute we try to recall them, we we draw on kind of narrative structures, be they verbal narrative structures or written narrative structures, to communicate what we want to tell. And often we end up reproducing stories from the past. Peter Burke, the cultural historian, has said in many respects people's memories get contaminated by these kind of broader traditional histories and perspectives.